And now, here is your host, John O'Donnell.
And welcome back to Cinder Block Sports. I am John O'Donnell with my producer Aaron Kabak, and we are joined now by Chris Fedor, who is the Cavaliers beat writer for Cleveland.com. Chris, thank you for joining us. How are you today?
You got it, Gus. Anytime. I'm doing great. How are you?
We're great. Thank you very much. Before we came on, we were talking about the NBA Finals, but first I want to open up with Dan Gilbert. Dan is the owner of the Cleveland Cavaliers. He suffered, I believe it's reported as a stroke. Chris, can you give an update on how Dan's doing and that whole situation?
Yeah, from what I know, John, he's doing better every day, and I think that's the best thing that you can hope for at this point in time. You know, for somebody who is so important to the Cavs' success, somebody who is so important to the NBA, seeing something like that when it came out, when it did, obviously it was probably pretty shocking. And they were tight-lipped about it at first, and I think you understand why. Dan wanted privacy, his family wanted privacy, but the little updates that we've gotten along the way seem to be positive. And from what I know, you know, he was very, very lucky that he decided to go to the hospital with a family friend the day that he did,
right.
Because had the stroke occurred away from their care, away from medical attention, they probably wouldn't have been able to get him to the emergency surgery the way that he did, which was very, very helpful. And from what I know, from what people are telling me, has played a large part in how quick he's been able to recover in just the entire process of this.
You made a really good comment there about how important Dan Gilbert is to the Cavaliers. I think he gets a bad rap. You know, obviously the letter following the decision was not the best move, and I think people have questioned him and his effectiveness as an owner. But what kind of leader is he for this Cavaliers team?
Look, I think it's a fair point, and I think people that question Dan have a right to question him based on the evidence that you have in front of you. The way that it's been explained to me by a number of people that have been around the organization for the last couple of years is that, you know, he's willing to do whatever it takes for this franchise to be great. He's given freedom to general managers. He's given freedom to head coaches. He's willing to go out and pay John Beilein what it costs in order to bring him here to Cleveland. He was willing to go above and beyond and try and get somebody like David Blatt because he thought that would be a good fit for what was supposed to be a young, up-and-coming, developing team. And then all of a sudden LeBron James comes back, and the kind of coach that they need was really, really different, and then he had no problems going with Ty Lue. So he's willing to do whatever it takes. The thing that I think is fair to question, John, is the execution, because that hasn't always been top level. That hasn't always been the best for the Cavs. He has the right intentions. I don't think he always understands the best process to go about that. But I think a lot of people that have worked for him and around him will say that not a lot of owners are like him in the sense of giving everybody the freedom to do the job at the highest level. The one thing that I think he needs to understand moving forward, though, is that he needs to let his people do the job that he hired them to do. And sometimes he oversteps. And I get it. It's natural. He's the owner of the team. He wants to be involved in these big decisions. He's always wanted to be involved in those big decisions. I think he's always going to want to, but he has to put more faith and belief in the guys that he hired to do those jobs, because they're the ones that put in the background. They're the ones that do the work behind the scenes. It
is a common issue with ownership in sports. We see that, you know, the meddling of an owner can really affect a team. We're glad that he's doing well health-wise. And hopefully, the Cavs can get back on the right track. You mentioned John Beilein. What kind of surprise was this for you, if at all? This was a real splashy move. I guess just how do you think John Beilein is going to adjust to the NBA, and why did he leave Michigan?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think he had been looking, John, to get into the NBA for a while. I had a conversation with Nick Stauskas a couple of weeks ago. He played for John Beilein at Michigan. He took one visit to Michigan. He met with John Beilein, and he decided to commit to Michigan. So he's kind of one of the success stories of John Beilein. He knows him really, really well. And he was saying that he had a conversation with John back in 2014, 2015 about Beilein saying that he was interested in one day going to the NBA, and they talked about it way back then. So I think this has been bubbling for some time with John having the itch to get to the NBA, challenge himself in a different way, see if he's ready for the next step in his life and in his career. He took an interview with the Detroit Pistons last offseason. He met with the Orlando Magic last offseason. And I just think if you take the record out of it and you take some of the dysfunction away from what the Cavs have shown to be without LeBron James, I think this is kind of a situation that makes sense for somebody like John. There aren't huge expectations for him to come in, win right away. He's going to be able to take his time, learn the NBA, learn what's different about the NBA, learn the players, learn the opposing coaches. And this is something that the Cavs want to grow organically over time. And he's big into player development. And that's what I think attracted him to this particular situation. Young Colin Sexton, young Jetty Osman, the guy that the Cavs are going to get with the 5th overall pick, the other guy that the Cavs are going to get with the 26th pick. So this just fits him in the things that he wants in terms of a team. He said he saw it a lot like Michigan. He saw it a lot like Canisius. He saw it a lot like West Virginia. He didn't take over ready-made programs. He took over programs that he could get his hands on and turn them into what his vision is, and I think he sees the same in the Cavs.
As an upstate New York native, the Canisius mention was well appreciated. Thank you, Chris. Appreciate that. We are joined by Chris Fedor of thecleveland.com. Excellent Cavs beat writer. Great follow on Twitter. Just really tuned into the Cavs. And you hit on a couple points that I wanted to bring up. This team is going to be very young, except Kevin Love is roughly 58 years old and has a huge contract. Is there an option maybe to move him for some younger pieces, or is he going to be a cornerstone of this team going forward for the next year or two?
Every time this question comes up, John, they give the same response to the people that ask it. They say, okay, you tell me how we get better by trading away Kevin Love.
That's fair.
In the short term and in the long term. See, that's the thing. They feel like, yes, even though he's on the wrong side of 30, even though he does have a history of injuries, even though he's got that big contract, his value is still long-term in the fact that he helps Colin Sexton. You know, he helps Jetty Osman. It's his leadership. It's the example that he sets every single day that those guys are trying to follow. And it's their development on the court because they don't have to be the focal point of the offense, getting the attention of the defense every single touch, every single possession. And in the short term, the evidence is there. Look at what they did when Kevin came back from injury. They were a different kind of team. Now, some of their record had to do with the teams that they were playing against. Right. But I think you could just watch them play and see that their level of basketball changed. This is a 5-time All-Star. This is an Olympian. This is a great player by NBA standards. This is somebody that you want to be in your organization. And on top of that, he wanted to be here. And I think that was meaningful for the Cavs. So look, if they get a deal that they think is going to benefit them greatly both in the short term and the long term, then yeah, of course they're going to explore it. But they just haven't seen those deals out there that make them feel like, yeah, we're going to be a better team. We're going to be a better franchise. We're going to have a better culture with Kevin Love out of it. So I just think it's going to be really, really difficult for them to change their mind unless they get quote-unquote blown away. And the thing is, John, I don't think anybody's going to quote-unquote blow them away for somebody like Kevin, who's kind of in that next tier of all-star as opposed to that top tier.
I love his game, and my wife will divorce me every time I say they should trade him. So I hope they keep him. He's a great player and leader. And you mentioned that, and you mentioned Colin Sexton. He really came on, if you will, in the second half of the season. I question whether he's a good enough shooter to be, effective in this day and age in the NBA. What is your thoughts on his game and maybe his ceiling as an NBA player?
So I think it's hard to know, and I know everybody wants the specific answer, like, oh, tell me that he's going to be a sixth man in the future. Tell me he's going to be an all-star in the future. Tell me he's going to be a rotational guy in the future. I can tell you that there were people within the organization throughout the course of last year that kept saying repeatedly, I think his future is sixth man. I don't think he's a starting point guard in the NBA. But those same people said, I don't think he can shoot at a high level. You know what I mean? So This is a guy who, coming out of Alabama and getting to the Cavs, made huge strides just in that short time. And then throughout the course of the season, he made big strides from October to December, and then again from December to March, and then again from March to April to the end of the season.
Yeah.
So I just think it's really, really difficult to know what a 19-year-old kid who has shown massive growth and development over the course of a year and a half is going to be in the future, because he wasn't supposed to be a great shooter, and he was one of the better shooting rookies in the NBA. Did anybody really think coming out of Alabama that he was going to shoot 40% from three-point range?
Right.
Hell no. The Cavs didn't even think he was going to be that kind of shooter in his rookie season, but he was. So if he was able to expand his game in that kind of way, out to the three-point line at a consistent level, like, I don't know why so many people are ready to say, like, he can't be a natural point guard into the future, or he can't become a better passer, because he just became something that people thought he couldn't be in such a short time. So I'm not going to put it past him at this point.
His growth was incredible. If not for Luka Doncic and Trae Young, I think we'd be talking about him as Rookie of the Year. I mean, his growth was fantastic, and I'm excited about it.
I mean, he was on the outside conversation,
right.
John, if you think about this. Sorry to cut you
No,
off.
please,
I mean,
yeah.
This is the 8th overall pick, right? I don't think a lot of people felt when he came to the Cavs that he was going to be in the conversation for first-team all-rookie. They certainly didn't think that in October.
No.
They certainly didn't think that in November and December, when he was going through some really, really tough times, where he was coming off the bench at times in fourth quarters because the Cavs internally felt like Matthew Dellavedova was a better option, or George Hill was a better option in those specific moments. So if you go back to where he was in November, getting worked by Kemba Walker, getting worked by Luka Doncic, there's nobody that would have said, oh yeah, he's going to be in the running for first-team all-rookie. But guess what? He was, and that shows immense growth and development, and I think that should lead people to say, yeah, maybe there's a little bit more here with Colin than what I think is on the surface.
I agree. And like you just said, he's 19 years old, maybe 20 now, and he is going to grow and grow. And I like what you said. Who are we to say what he's going to become? It's going to be exciting. Yep. And he's going to get teamed up with the number 5 pick. And we'll be joined by Chris Fedor. Chris, I appreciate your time. I'll get you out of here soon. But the number 5 pick, the number 26 pick, you did a mock draft recently. Where do you see the Cavs going with that number 5 pick?
So here's the hard thing, I think, John, and it's not just for the Cavs. I think it's with other teams picking between 5 and 10. The way that I understand it is that there is a belief around the NBA that, one, there's a drop from 3 to 4, but then there's another drop from 4 to 5. So 5 to 10, you can throw those names up in the air that are written on a piece of paper, and they can come down in any order, and you'd be like, okay, yeah, sure, that makes sense. I can make an argument that that's the list that they should go in. And then next week you can do the same thing, and you're like, well, all right, sure, that's the order that makes a lot of sense. So I just think it's going to be really, really difficult for teams between 5 and 10 to figure out, okay, is it Jarrett Culver or is it DeAndre Hunter? Is it Cam Reddish? Is it Jarrett Culver? Right? Do we bring Bol into the mix because he's this unique 7-footer who can pass, dribble, and shoot from range? So you can put them in any order and make the argument, and I think it would make sense. And it's going to be really, really difficult to figure out which one makes the most sense, and I think it's probably going to come down to what makes the most sense for your organization. What are the traits that you value the most? And I think because the Cavs are in a situation where they need that centerpiece of this rebuild, I get the sense that they'd be willing to swing for the fences. And to me, that points more to somebody like Cam Reddish, who you're drafting him a lot on what he can be, not who he already is. And it's about potential with him because he didn't really show it at the same level that, say, Jarrett Culver did, or R.J. Barrett did, or Zion Williamson did. There's a lot of stuff that you would have to really believe in terms of the traits that Cam can bring to the table. So that's where I'm leaning right now. But look, if you ask me in a week or 2 weeks from now, I might tell you that it makes more sense that they go with DeAndre Hunter, Jarrett Culver, or any of these guys that are in the mix between 5 and 10.
Real quick, you mentioned something that I haven't heard too much of, which is the drop between 4 and 5. Who's in that 4 spot that everybody thinks is so solid? Is there a name there?
Yeah, I think it's Darius Garland from Vanderbilt.
Yeah, the point.
And I think part of what has happened here, John, is that, look, when you only play 5 games, yeah, there are questions about you, but it's also like, hey, you didn't play long enough where your flaws were exposed, where we can start nitpicking all the bad things that we saw. So Darius Garland was able to shut it down, and then he becomes this mysterious draft prospect, right, where you're like, ooh, I don't know. Maybe he can be the next Kyrie Irving type, right, where he only played 11 games in college, and then all of a sudden you get him to your place and you work him out and you see all of those flashes, and the only thing that you're focused on are the positives and the flashes because you don't have enough time to really see those perceived negatives. I think the other thing with Garland is, look, this is a guy who he was ballyhooed going into college. This is a guy who can shoot from NBA range already, and in a draft that there are a lot of question marks about who these guys are, what these guys can become. The one thing that you feel like you know translates to the NBA game is shooting. And there's an argument to be made that Darius Garland is the best pure shooter in this year's draft class. So I think because of that, he's a different guy than everybody else in the top 10. Because what's the question about R.J. Barrett? Shooting. What's the question about Zion? Shooting. What's the question about Jarrett Culver, DeAndre Hunter, and Cam Reddish? The same thing. Mm-hmm. They don't have those same questions with Garland because of who he is and what he has shown himself to be in that short sample.
We have been joined by Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com. Chris, thank you for all your time, and thank you for getting ballyhooed in on the show. The over-under was 10:45, and you made the under. Before I let you go, this show has been themed Cleveland Rocks. We've been talking about Cleveland sports. You've been a Cleveland sports fan, I think, your whole life. What is your favorite thing about being a Cleveland sports fan, or maybe your favorite memory as a Cleveland fan?
That's a good question. I think my favorite thing about it is just the passion that people have.
Yeah.
And sometimes you can call it blind faith in some of these organizations, right? But if you're a true diehard sports fan, you know, fan is short for fanatic for a reason. So sometimes it seems like your team is in the cellar, but you're still hanging on to the hope of what they can become. You know what I mean? You're not so focused on what they aren't. You're not so focused on the other people that are ripping them to shreds and making fun of them and you're the punchline. Right. Your focus is like, yeah, okay, we are right now, but there's a belief, there's a hope that we're going to get out of this. And I think my favorite memory, truthfully, was the 90s Indians. I went to all those games at Jacobs Field. I loved Manny Ramirez. I loved all those players they had. I think the first time I ever cried in a sporting event was when the Indians lost in the World Series to the Marlins. I remember I was watching it with my dog, Champ. He was sitting there on my bed right next to me, and I just lost it.
Yeah.
And that told me how much it meant to me, right? I mean, I might have been too young to truly understand, but I was still moved by it. And I think that's the other great thing about sports is they bring out so many different emotions in you, both good and bad. And I don't know that any other thing in life really does that.
I say it all the time. The greatest thing about sports is we can care so much about something that in the biggest picture doesn't mean all that much. We can really get emotionally invested in something that in our real lives, you know, we can take or leave it. And I think that's a great thing about sports. And I'm a Bills fan, so you want to talk about crushing losses. I got plenty of them for you, Chris. Chris Fedor, thank you so much for all your time today. Have a wonderful weekend, and we really appreciate you joining the show. Thank you.
You got it, man. Anytime.
Yep. That was Chris Fedor of Cleveland.com. Guys, he is on everywhere. He's on The Fan a lot. He is on Twitter. He is one of the absolute best Cleveland Cavaliers reporters I've ever talked to, and really one of the best guys to talk sports with, as you could tell there. So thank him for joining the show. We're going to take calls. We only have 15 minutes left in the show and a break. So we're going to take calls from here to the end. So if you're listening and want to call in, 234-200-5110. We're going to take a break. Why don't we take that break now? We'll leave more time for the last segment. So we'll take a break now, and we'll come back with your calls and my thoughts on Chris Fedor.